in all aspects of society. Grounding this in our minds, we will begin with our land acknowledgement. So I'm Karen Roundpoint, and I come to you virtually from the unceded lands of the Ganyigahaga of the Haudenosaunee, which is colonially known as Somerstown, Ontario. All lands and waterways connect locally to the vast traditional areas of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishtabeg, and across Yonginista Hunja, our Mother Earth, to Inuit First Nations and Métis people. Let us also remember those who arrived involuntarily, especially by the slave trade. So systemic and structural arrangements of power caused by the enduring legacy of colonialism have caused oppression. These arrangements have served to displace and disconnect the first people and their communities, families, and culture. That oppression has and still influences the way non-Indigenous people perceive and interact with and or for Indigenous people. This associated stigma and discrimination causes further marginalization. As a descendant of a wide variety of colonial ancestors, it is my responsibility to understand how colonialism has been used to gain unfair advantages to create these systems of oppression, and how it has also formed my privilege. I know that my whiteness is not a biological category, that racism is pervasive in all institutions and throughout all society, and that I have a role in dismantling it. One way in which I do this is by sharing the information from Amahia's Turn, who's a condoled chief, sub-chief, a knowledge keeper in Akwesasne. He advised that at the time of the treaty signing in this area, the Ganyigahaga did not support it. Other than the pre-contact Gaswenta, which is also known as the Chiro Wampum, and the ditch with one spoon belt, I always ask, why do we acknowledge treaties, especially in land acknowledgements, when one signatory party has not upheld their end? Yet the first people maintained their complex worldview of interconnectedness and belonging. And as Pastor Daho, who is a firekeeper of the Six Nations, Leon Shenandoah, said, I come to deeply listen to what the seeds have to share. As we enter our learning opportunity, let us remember that all life, representing people, animals, water, sentient beings, are interrelated. This same Tadadaho also said, the greatest power is the creator, but if you want to know the greatest strength, that is gentleness. And with this, I say skana, which means path or peace. So now, welcoming you all, I have been bestowed with the honor of introducing Becky Sasakamoose Kuffner. Becky is a member of the Atataku Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. She holds undergraduate degrees from the University of Regina and Université Laval, as well as a master's degree in education foundations from the University of Saskatchewan. He has extensive work experience at the community, provincial, and national level as a cultural diversity and race consultant, policy analyst, and employment consultant. He has founded organizations such as the Anti-Racism Network of Saskatoon and the Prairie Centre for Racial Justice, and participates in various capacities with many others. Although academia and work are important, I would highlight that Becky is a gentle, compassionate, committed to making positive change, knowledgeable, kind, a continual adaptive learner, a tireless advocate for people experiencing oppression, amongst other pieces, and wears her life experiences with introspection and pride. Becky will be providing a high-level overview of a complex topic in which we are encouraged to open our hearts and minds, facilitating anti-oppressive growth within ourselves, our work, and our communities. Thank you very much, Becky, for joining us today. And I know this introduction is just a brief overview of what you've actually accomplished so far.
Well, that was incredibly kind, Karen. Thank you so much for that introduction. And it's truly an honor for me to be invited to speak with you. It is a passion, and I'd like to, before I start the presentation, I'd like to, first of all, thank all of you for taking the time to be here, and thank you for the introduction. And I'd like to share a little bit about, my own personal story about how it is that I came to do this work. And before I do that, I'm just going to get my daughter to turn off the dryer so that it doesn't bother as I'm telling this story. Sorry, one second. All right, working from home still. All right, so I am part of the 60 Scoop, and I never really intended to do anti-racism work originally when I was growing up. I'm from Saskatchewan, and when I was growing up, I was born in the 70s, which was our inherent rights and our constitutional rights. And so understanding those changes and how Canada is going to come into alignment with those rights is of particular interest, not only to me academically, but also personally. So as a teenager, I was particularly interested and concerned about my own identity as an Indigenous person. And I never went by Sasakamoose the majority of the time that I was growing up. I went by Kuffner because that was the name that was given to me by my adoptive parents. However, when I searched for my birth parents as an adult, and I explained to them that for the first 5 years I was looking for my parents, I wasn't able to find them because my mother wouldn't respond to any of the inquiries that I had made. Um, and that's another story for an entirely different day. But when I finally was able to make contact with my father, the law changed. And he immediately responded to my requests after 5 years. And I was expecting not to hear anything from him because of the stereotypes of Indigenous men, aren't interested in raising their children, or there are so many children that Indigenous people are overwhelmed. They're substance abuse. They have too many children, all types of negative stereotypes that I thought I wasn't going to be reunited. And then when I was, he said to me, I've been looking for you. And I was 24 at the time. And he said, I've been looking for you since you were born. You were never relinquished. We always wanted you. And it changed the way that I thought about racism and the work that I was doing. And I decided then to be able to take up anti racism as an academic and a personal pursuit. And I had already been working for the federal government in the RCMP. And I then spent 9 years in Aboriginal labor force development with the provincial government. And in 2008, I moved from Ottawa. I was working with the Canadian International Development Agency, and I was working with the city of Saskatoon. So since 2008, I have worked as an anti-racism practitioner with the municipality. And there have been a lot of changes over the course of the last, I'm going into 17 years. So within the last 17 years, there has been, I think, an incredible amount of work that has been done. A lot of it is working in equity and diversity, or employment equity. And over the course of the last 8 years or 17 years, 16 years that I've been working with the municipal government, I have taken what I have learned personally from being a 60 scoop survivor and understanding that my parents who raised me, my white parents, really did provide me with a wonderful foundation of love and support. But also at the same time realize that mainstream institutions and organizations are maintaining unidentified racism in ways that we think are very well-meaning and are very well-intended. However, what we realize, even though the best of intentions don't always, they don't always produce the outcomes that we're looking to be able to produce. So in the story that I wanted to be able to say, the reason that I have two names is because I realize that when we are coming together, it can be very difficult. But yet I chose to add Sasakamoose to my name to honor my own reality, and my own heritage and my own experience as a 60 scoop Indigenous person, because I believed when I was growing up that I didn't have a real Indigenous story because I was raised by white people, and that I couldn't tell time from the sun, or that I couldn't find my way out of a forest or something silly like that, because I learned what being Indigenous was like by watching TV. And so as an adult, when I actually became closer to my family, I realized that uh, um, adding Sasakamoose to my name was a way of being able to honor my father's experience as well, because he was devastated by that, by losing a child. And it is celebration, I think, or it is an opportunity to be able to come together. So I've never renounced the name Kuffner. I've always chosen to keep both of them. And it's really long and it never fits in any of those forms. And it certainly doesn't fit right when I fly. And I always have trouble trying to convince them that I have two names and that it actually fits in the boxes. But I choose to continue to go by both Sasakamoose and Kuffner. And in the practice that of anti-racism, it's always been very difficult to convince people that it's not anti-white. And it really isn't. And so, in doing that, I'd like to be able to share the ways that we have been able to put together tools that help understand some of the major concepts and how systemic racism actually manifests itself into some of our organizations and why it becomes so difficult to really understand and discern how do we work towards eliminating racial discrimination by being adaptive to some of the services that we still need to, but
Would you prefer them to interrupt you?
probably to interrupt me, Karen, actually, because then that way I can respond to the questions almost as they come in,
Okay,
and
perfect.
then they
Great.
won't get lost. Because sometimes the nature of the information, it helps if the question is responded to right at the time. So yes, if anybody has any questions, I don't mind if you pop in and ask any questions, and I'll try and keep an eye on the screen to see if there are any hands up.
I'll try and do the same thing. Thanks, Becky.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Karen. So this is an integrated systems lens. And so I wanted to take a look a little bit about, some of the work that has already been done in this particular area. A lot of the healthcare corrections have already looked at the forward trajectory of where we are and why it is so imperative to understand racism, because really the issue is not about diversity or inclusion. What we're wanting to be able to look at is mitigating racism and ultimately the harm that is caused from racism. And looking at the trajectory that we currently see, we know that it is not sustainable socially, politically, economically, and in particular, I think we should really include the environment, which hasn't largely been included to this point when we're talking about population public health, in particular, but I think the environment is really important for us to be able to include. And so if we look at all of these different elements, and we can look at multiple different, the social determinants of health, for example, multiple different community well-being indexes or indices, the Millennium Development Goals are multiple different measurement factors that measure the well-being of people of color and Indigenous people. So this particular lens looks at an integrated systems lens that demonstrates unequal outcomes across the board. And we recognize that this community well-being index is year after year after year after year. And despite the best of intentions and the most well-meaning folks, who are working within organizations, and I must say that I have worked within organizations for many, many years, and I honestly, people are very well-meaning and are not interested in maintaining or upholding racism. So we look at these community well-being indexes, and this one in particular is from 2016. And this is Statistics Canada census. And even from 2016, especially since the pandemic and since the growing disparity between the costs of living, these gaps are only growing. So despite the best of intention, we know that uh, uh, the best of efforts are not actually making uh, they're not actually making the changes that we're hoping to make. So often what we see, and I've said this I don't know how many times, in different presentations. It's one of my favorite analogies is that we're not becoming butterflies, that we are becoming caterpillars and just better caterpillars in the efforts that we're making over the years. So we have tried Aboriginal awareness. Some of the approaches that we have in the past are Aboriginal awareness, human rights, civil rights, cultural sensitivity, employment equity, representative workforce, diversity and inclusion. And now we've thrown diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now we have the practice of anti-racism. And it all becomes incredibly confusing to people about, especially folks who are all very well-meaning. And how do we apply all of these to be able to achieve some of the results that we want to see? And what I have found in a lot of ways is that some of the best of intentions are actually being focused at what is not the problem. And so the best of intentions, if we focus at creating initiatives, we're never really going to solve what the source of the problem is. So if we understand the source of the problem, the initiatives or the efforts that we have to try and address the very egregious numbers that we have in social outcomes, hopefully will be better. And we can also try and understand that a collective impact to address the source of the problem will be successful, as opposed to continuing to spend our human resources and our financial resources on efforts that only continue to contribute to the problem. So I used to think, for example, that racism was just a few bad apples. So out of high school, I had a couple of years of university and I joined the RCMP. And in the RCMP, this was a very large, very systemic organization. And that's what the understanding was at the time, was that it was just a few bad apples. And I think that this understanding is very common, that there's only a few people who enter the organization, and it's the racist people or people who have racist thoughts or interpersonal racism. And that's what makes this a few bad apples, and that's how racism seeps into an organization. So it was just a few bad apples type of um, problem that needed to be addressed. So what I would like to be able to share is, first of all, is understanding some of the few major concepts of how we understand systemic and institutionalized racism, and then to look at the equity indicators framework that we developed at the Anti-Racism Network, to look at and to help organizations understand what are the practices and the policies and the procedures that they are doing that maintains colonial processes and structures. And then what are they doing, or what are we doing? And I'm going to say we, because we're all in it together. And there isn't anybody that is doing a whole lot better than anybody else. So we're all in this together. And we do this as ways to move forward. So how are we tokenizing Indigenous and Black and Brown people of color? And how are we being truly diverse organizations? And how are we actually moving to work towards decolonization? So this is a concept that is quite different from what we have actually understood previously, because what we've understood previously is if our organizations are diverse and if we are inclusive, then we have met our moral and our legal obligations. However, we recognize that Indigenous people in our own lands and territories have rights that are different and uh, distinct from human rights that are there's 7 within the section 15 of the Human Rights Code. So race, gender, class, sexual orientation. What is important about understanding racism is that it isn't about diversity. And this is really important about, the efforts that we're currently using